and then the points will be coming up shortly. So in terms of agenda, today's session is really about change management, and during last month's presentation or session, we had indicated that sustaining and standardizing within 5S were really the biggest challenges in terms of keeping a 5S initiative going and going, in a very healthy sort of way. So our agenda today, what we're going to do is, of course, we already covered the Kahoot portion. We're going to talk a little bit about how 5S really relates to managing change, or gets down to being a change management issue. And we're going to do that by looking at a couple different models. There are a myriad of different models and tools that exist out there, but in the interest of time, we picked two that were favored by some of the board members that felt that these would be very useful to just have a quick highlight and touch on today. And moreover, what's the ultimate goal? It's really all about getting 5S, into the head, the hearts, and the hands of the teams that really need to carry it out. And the ultimate goal, of course, is to have it become just a natural way of thinking or doing. Couple different ways you could look at that is unconscious competence, regular just ways of working. So ultimately, again, targeted at that standardizing and sustaining. Then, of course, we'll have a Q&A session at the end, but I would encourage, if you've got any questions, comments, or thoughts along the way, feel free to chat those in. Tyler is going to monitor that. I cannot, your presenter today is incapable of walking and chewing gum at the same time. So I'm leaning on Tyler to watch the chats. So Tyler, fire away if there's anything. And speaking of, before we dive in, is there anything that we need to cover?
Nothing has come in yet, so we're good to go.
Okay, well, thanks. And again, change management is, of course, the focus issue today. And the definition of it, of course, is the process, tools, and techniques that we would use to manage the people side. And that's very important. The people side of change to consistently achieve a required business outcome. Couple points here is you could get by without any kind of a change management philosophy or focus. And you might sort of have beginner's luck, and you might do well with the 5S initiative, but using something a little bit more structured and methodical definitely helps with more consistent change and robust change. And in terms of the people side, with any kind of a change initiative, the ultimate goal is to move from a current state into a transition state, and then getting locked into that future desired state. And there are two different sides to that, the technical side and the people side. And oftentimes, the reason a 5S initiative or any other kind of change initiative might fail or stall is not so much so on the technical side, but it's on the people side. A lot of teams and organizations kind of underestimate how important it is to deal with the change management and behavioral side of individuals in the team to ensure the successful outcome. So the first model that we're going to look at is one that was authored by Jeff Hyatt, who is the founder of ProSci, and it's called ADKAR, an acronym standing for, as you can see here, awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. The first component is awareness, and that's really having the team understand why. And in the case of 5S, it's why are we doing this? And we're going to look at a few key factors for each of these components. And the key factors are really, you could think of them as being the potential speed bumps or roadblocks. And in terms of awareness, those would be, the individual's view of the current state. If they think the current state is just fine, there's going to be a problem in advancing that particular change initiative. How the people perceive problems is also going to influence how receptive they will be to participating in the change. And then also the credibility of the sender. So, for example, if you've got a really strong opinion leader within the organization that could help carry forward the message of the desired outcome of 5S, that would be a good example of a consideration around that particular factor. Tyler, any questions or comments so far?
Not yet.
Okay, let's move on to the next component, which is desire. And people really need to make a personal decision and need to desire to make a change in order for it to be effective. So some of the key factors there, of course, many of us are probably familiar with the WIFM acronym, what's in it for me. So the better a change can be communicated in a way that it shows how it's going to benefit the team members, the more likely the success of that change initiative would be. Organizational context and the individual situation are also very important factors. Organizational context, an example of that would be, is the firm was it recently acquired by a larger firm? Is the team distracted by things associated with that? Those are just some examples, but again, important factors to look at in terms of trying to ensure that the team desires to move forward. The next component is knowledge, and that is getting a little bit into the technical part, but the people really they need to know before, during, and after the change. They need certain levels of knowledge around certain things. So as it relates to 5S, of course, it's they need to understand the structure of 5S and what it is that you're trying to get out of it. Key factors there, of course, what do they currently know? Also, learning styles and learning capacities. That's something else to be very mindful of. If you've got a team that is wrestling with a lot of new initiatives, let's say there's a new enterprise-wide IT platform that has just been implemented, that might not be a real good time to be trying to drive a 5S initiative. So it may or may not. I mean, it could actually pave the road. It just depends on exactly what's going on in the organization and what the style and capacity is of the people to onboard the new information and learnings. Next is ability, and that would be the individual team members' physical ability and psychological ability to implement the change. Good example of this is if the time is not afforded to the group to do the organizational work, the sorting and setting, you might have a 5S initiative that would fail. Habits are another key factor to look at very closely. Habits can be deeply ingrained, and if in the case of 5S, if an unorganized or disorganized kind of thing is a widespread habit within the organization, that's going to become a very important challenge or factor that you'll need to look at in successfully moving that team through that change. Time and resources, of course, people need to be afforded the time and the resources to be able to do what they're being asked to do. Questions, comments?
Not anything yet, Chair.
Okay. The last component is reinforcement, and this one is probably one of the most important components out of the ADKAR model with respect to what we're talking about today, and that is sustaining the gains or sustaining the sustaining part of 5S. And here, there are a couple of very important key factors. Accountability is very key, because if folks aren't held accountable, they're not going to be very motivated, to help move that 5S initiative forward. Lack of oversight and an absence of recognition. If people really put out a lot of effort and make some great strides, but it goes to their perception unnoticed and unappreciated, then there's a likelihood that 5S initiative is going to start to suffer and stall out a bit. So it's kind of like accountability and the recognition part. They're like opposite sides of the same coin, but very important to reinforce the effort. And that one is just absolutely pivotal in terms of what we're talking about today, and that's sustaining the 5S, the 5S change management. So what happens when if you're missing any one of those components? And, if you look at the top row where all the components are in place, those are all required for successful change. But if you're missing awareness, could very likely lead to confusion and hamper the effort. If you're missing desire, you're going to have resistance, missing knowledge, fear and anxiety, ability. Of course, the team could get very frustrated and stressed out. They recognize what they need to do, but they just, for whatever reason, don't have the ability to be able to do it. And then reinforcement, lack of reinforcement could easily revert to the whole program reverting back to its former state or backsliding. So now I guess it's time for our next quiz. So we will call that up here, and pardon me, getting behind myself here. So if everyone's ready with their smartphones, we'll go ahead and advance to the next question. This is our scoreboard from the last one. We've got a summary of results, and of course the scores were 0 on that. That was by design, but the next one will be scored. So our next one is ADCAR stands for, and if you look at the screen, there are the response choices, and respond on your smartphone. Okay, wow, we have 9 correct responses. Excellent. Okay, let's proceed to the next one. And here's our current scoreboard. Looks like Courtney is in the lead. Okay, quick responses, got a divided audience. We have Casey jumping to the lead. Okay. We have some competition out here today. I think we have one more question in this segment. All right. And Tyler, that was our 4th and last for this segment, correct?
Yep.
Okay, we'll take a quick look at the scoreboard. Okay, congratulations, Casey. And Maris came up to 2nd place there. And we have 6 more questions to go a little further down. So let's go ahead and proceed Before we get into the next change management model, Tyler, did we have any chat questions, comments?
Not any chat questions. If somebody would want to come off a mute briefly and ask a question, you can. Otherwise, we'll keep going.
Okay, well, excellent. The next model that we're going to look at is adapted from the work of Dr. Douglas and Dr. Not sure how that's pronounced, but Cassioppi. And the four components for successful change are, this model is very similar to ADKAR, but a little bit simpler. And it's kind of, I'll point out up front, it's missing the reinforcement component. So something to keep in mind. But this particular one is looking at clear vision, pressure for change, capacity for change, actionable first steps. And we'll go through those one by one. And I apologize, we had some slide builds planned for this, but because of some IT issues here today and dual screen monitors, it didn't work. So anyway, we'll just walk through this. Clear vision, the important part of that is it's not necessarily like a company vision, although it could be. It's mainly what is the vision for this particular change initiative. And for us talking today about 5S, it is what is your team's, what is their vision? What do they see the end game looking like with 5S? It needs to be a shared common understanding. Everyone needs to clearly know what the goals and objectives are. Why 5S is important to the team, and communication for this step. It's you cannot over communicate. So definitely, don't underestimate communication. The pressure for change component is really all about creating a sense of urgency. Many change management professionals will use other burning platforms, like if there's, say, customer service issues, shipping issues, on-time shipping, and that somehow ties back to a state of disorganization. They'll use that burning platform to point out and help the team understand the urgency of needing to move ahead and move outside their comfort zone. So 5S in that sense could be a real foundational piece that can help fix other issues. And a key thing in getting people to understand a sense of urgency is really focusing on that gap between, okay, so we've identified what the desired state is, where are we at right now, and really highlight the opportunities that are within that gap. In terms of capacity for change, this kind of ties back to the ADKAR. It's very parallel to the ability and knowledge part, but it's, do you have the right training in place? Is there visible support from the management team? Do people, have everything, the basic resources that they need to be able to carry that forward? And then actionable next steps, of course, is, you can't boil the ocean and try to do too much at one time. So if you think about last month's edition, we talked a little bit about 5S, and it's start in one area, get it down there, and then cascade it to others. So another way of thinking about that is think big, start small, and then plan on short-term actions and really drive and publicize quick wins with the team. Make sure that those actionable first steps are small goals that follow the SMART model that many people are probably familiar with. That's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely or time bound. Celebrate progress, review it frequently, and take advantage of those quick wins. So similar to the ADKAR model, let's take a look at what happens if you're missing one of these components. Of course, if you've done well with all four, you really increase your chances of having a successful change initiative or 5S implementation. If you're missing the clear vision, you could easily have everybody pumped up. They feel the urgency, they've got the capacity, they've got some first steps, but they really don't see where they're headed. So it's a fast start that fizzles out quickly. If you're missing the pressure for change or the sense of urgency, That one's pretty simple. It's at the bottom of the inbox. People just feel like I'll do it when I get around to it, and it just kind of languishes. Missing the capacity for change, um, similar to the missing ability in ADKAR, this leads to stress, anxiety, frustration. And then finally, without actionable first steps, you just have all kinds of haphazard starts and false starts with the program. So, Tyler, any questions or chat comments?
None that I see yet.
Okay, well, that takes us to our next quiz then. So let's go ahead and proceed with that now that we're experts on the 4 components of successful change. All right, let's see how we did. Okay, Maris and Casey still battling it out for the top spot. Okay, a lot of good answers. Have a little bit of change up. John coming into second place there. All right, nice. We'll take a look at the leaderboard. Deb jumping to the front. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into the next component or next segment of our presentation. And now we're going to shift gears just a little bit. Now that we've talked about those 2 models, we're going to spend just a few minutes on understanding how do we really drive this new way of working in a sustainable way so that ultimately it becomes, like we said with the agenda slide, an unconscious competence or really just a natural way. So when we start off with initiative, with an initiative, it's very common that the level of consciousness about it and the level of competence is going to be low. So that's very typical for the start. And then as you learn a little bit more about it, you become conscious of some of the things that need to be done, but there's still a level of incompetence. Haven't had the practice, haven't gotten deep into the implementation. Then once you get a little further along, then you're becoming very competent with running, say, very competent with the 5S, with the sort set, etc. But it's all a very conscious effort. You really have to think hard about it to be able to do it right. And then ultimately, once it really gets very well, it matures very well, it becomes something that we just do naturally. And it's that unconscious competence, or as some people like to put it, it's part of our DNA. It's our standard work, or it's a wow. It's a way of working. Very simply put, it's how we do things around here. And that's what it really takes to be able to continuously drive that standardization and sustainability, or the sustain component of 5S. And another way of looking at that too, the Dunning-Kruger effect, if some of you have seen that, it really relates very well to this model that we just reviewed, and we're going to walk through that quickly and see how. But it's like at the beginning of any kind of a change effort, confidence can tend to run high. I know everything. You don't need to tell me anything. I know all I need to know about this. And people are, oftentimes a little bit overly confident. And what's really going on at that stage is that's when you're at that stage where you really don't know what you don't know. And then when you start to learn what you don't know, that's where you start kind of going down in confidence. You're actually learning more, but your confidence level is starting to go down. And that's where you hit that, the point of, there's a lot more to this than what I anticipated. And then it starts to even feel, a little bit of despair. I'll never get this. And then sticking with it, far enough. And that's where the change management and understanding how to help people stay the course so that they get to that point of it starting to make sense. And then ultimately they get to the top, and their confidence level is very high, but they're very clear. Hey, this was a lot more complicated than what I thought, but hey, I'm glad I'm here. So looking at how that relates to the other, conscious incompetence kind of thing, um, it's very parallel to that, that you start off with low confidence, low knowledge at the unconscious incompetence, and then that quickly I know everything. But then once you start to discover that you don't, that's where that conscious incompetence comes from. And again, change management to help pull the people through that, goes a long way to help pull them along so that they could manage, through that trough with the reinforcement out of ADKAR, the positive reinforcement and all those other things that are in place, like the knowledge, the ability, helping people avoid those stress points and those frustration points. That's what's really going to help them make it through this trough and finally emerge out into where you really want them to be, which again, that lands you at the ultimate goal. It's the way of working. It's in your DNA. It's just how things are done. And you think about it, it's just a natural thing. You don't even have to think about it. It just occurs at that point. So before we move to our last segment of testing, Tyler, any questions or comments on chat?
No. Nope.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and we're getting, I guess this would be considered like the final exam portion. So true or false? Here we go. All right. Okay. It's kind of looking like this final exam is shaping up to be one of the easiest ones. And we've got a little shakeup on the leaderboard. Got Jake coming into second place. I guess our final question could determine the outcome. Maris making a comeback with 3 in a row. Courtney and John right behind. So let's go into the last question. Somewhat divided on this one. Let's take a look at our leaderboard. Whoa. Number 3, Jake. Deb, number 2. And Courtney takes the lead. We've got Joel and Maris as runners up. Okay. Tyler, on that last question, our responses were just a bit divided. And as you and I talked, that one was, on one hand, it looks simple, but it is a little bit tricky. you want to elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, is there a way we can pull that question up again so we can see it?
Yeah,
Maybe there's not.
Yeah, it was the question
It's on the screen right now.
Pardon?
I was saying it's on the screen right now. Your screen, Jerry.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's towards the bottom. There
Yeah,
we go.
yep. Thank you. Yeah, it is the last one there.
Yeah. Yeah. So Jerry, you kind of touched on it earlier in the first few slides, but these models, if you don't have ADCAR, if you don't utilize the 4 components of change, you can still have some success in your change. It's just not going to be as consistent over time. You know, when you describe going into a project, what success is going to mean, just because you don't follow ADCAR or have the 4 components of change, you might still reach that target. What these do is they just give you a methodology to rely on, that you can have consistent change and you can better achieve. We don't have the diagram that we use for Centec, but we can better transition people out of the current state into the desired state and reach success much more consistently when we have these models. So we're not saying, okay, without these models, you're never going to have success. That's not what we're saying. We're saying if you want more consistent success, where your employees experience better morale and you have more sustainability of your processes and changes, having ADCAR, having the 4 components of change is really useful in achieving that.
Thanks, Tyler. And yeah, just a quick recap. What we did, of course, we talked a little bit about 5S and how it's really a managing change type of issue. And then we looked at the 2 different models, and then wrapped up with, how to develop, or that view on the ultimate goal, of course, is to get to that unconscious competence level or ways of working. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and open things up for Q&A if people want to unmute and or chat questions into Tyler, that would be great.
Anyone wants to come off of mute, ask a question, that'd be great. Maybe one, Jerry, what's the biggest difference between the ADCAR model and the 4 components of change?
I would say that reinforcement is probably the biggest, because the 4 components really doesn't address that. And the other difference is that the ADCAR, with the ability and knowledge, it separates those 2 out so that you could address some of the specific issues related, to those subsets of areas to concentrate on. Whereas the 4 components just has it all lumped under capacity to change. So I think all the issues are still the same and need to be dealt with on some level. And either framework could help guide a person through that.
Perfect, thank you. Any other questions?
I just have a comment. I see that, with the whole purpose of the education is around the change management. What do you guys feel about, how do specific cultural behaviors tie into the ability for a initiative to be sustained?
You want to start with that one, Jerry?
Could you repeat that, Joel? The question?
Yeah, so a lot of this has to do with how, the philosophy around change, and every organization is different. So what do you think are some of the key behaviors that an organization would have to have in order for the sustained activity to, or the change to actually be sustained?
Yeah, I think following those frameworks or something similar would help. But one of the things that we just touched on briefly, didn't go into it deeply, but having the visible commitment of the leadership team is so crucially important in all this. Having their endorsement and their support in it. In fact, I would even go so far as to say that any type of a change initiative like 5S, somehow that needs to be tied back to I'll call it a strategic imperative that is in the purview of the executive team. I don't know, Joel or Tyler, if you want to add anything to that, or
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head, Jerry, where the visibility and the transparency of management and leadership needs to be in the forefront in order for the initiative to get traction, to get funding, to have validity, so that the organization can really grab a hold of it. Because if the leadership is not engaged, then obviously it's not going to go very far.
Yep, exactly. And if
Right.
it doesn't engage like that, it could be successful, it could be going along, but it depends on the climate of the organization at that time. But to be able to weather storms, like if things get tough and say cuts have to be made, what you don't want is, I guess ideally, and what would be exactly the opposite of that, ideally, it would be an initiative that the executive team would clearly be behind and say, we can't afford to cut that, versus they don't have that kind of visible support for it, and they're looking for ways to reduce costs, reduce efforts, however you want to cut it. But that's where the initiative could get its support pulled. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I see that, Jacob put a question out there, and I'd like to kind of answer that a little bit. Jacob, you're not alone when you're in a position where you want to try to make change and you're not quite in that spot where you can. One of the things that is so important is to try to push for visual measurements, visual metrics, some form of graphical display that is out in front of people that you can use to track even small things, small performance, 5S audits, but they need to be out in front of people. They need to be exposed so that everybody can see how the process is evolving and changing, and those measurements are out in front of everybody. Because one of the first things of all these models Jerry talked about is the awareness. The first section, is awareness. And so you create awareness by creating that visual representation of change. And you do that through measurements, through graphical representation. So that's a big thing that somebody in an organization that's, not in a higher position, you can move even in your own little work cell. Can you actually audit your own little workstation and have it posted and have somebody come by and walk through it with you, and then create that conversation around, my score, I think, is this, and what do you think about it? And you start having dialogue around what that measurement means. That's a really important piece to start with.
I know we're past the allotted time here. We did have one more question if we just want to hang on and address that. It's maybe similar in nature, but it is, what if I disagree with the change that my manager or company is implementing? That sort of relates in a way to Jacob's question there, but any thoughts on that, Jerry or Joel or anyone?
Yeah, I guess my first thought would be, what's wrong with the alignment? It's like either the vision for the change initiative itself isn't aligned with the organizational goals, or the manager's personal goals aren't aligned. To me, it's very apparent that there would be a disconnect somewhere there. I don't know, Joel, do you have thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important piece, and a lot of times disagreement comes because of not having clear, concise communication. So why, what about that change process is not working for everybody? And as you go through your workday and working with different companies, that we rarely agree all day long. But having clear, concise communication on what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to do it are the critical things to help educate and communicate the initiative to everybody. So that's kind of when I start hearing about disagreement, I start asking, well, why? Why do we have it? And where's the gap? What can we do to close that gap so that people are in agreement, or we address the issues that are driving the disagreement?
Absolutely. Any other questions before we close it down? I don't see anything in the chat.
Nice job, Jerry and Tyler. You guys did a great job running our first Cahoots game. I think it's great. I think we're gonna engage in this more. I think it's a great way. We saw great participation, so thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And yeah, on that front, a call out to Maris and Jake there. They helped us along with that and provided the original idea for it. We hope everyone enjoyed that friendly competition. And also, there may be other platforms that are similar that might have other benefits. So we'll definitely plan on keeping something in the mix to have that kind of competitive response type thing. But stay tuned. Yeah, and we'll in the spirit of plan, do, check, adjust. We might make changes in the future, but we'll keep an eye on it. So any feedback that anybody has, by all means, funnel that in to Seven Rivers Lean, and we'd be glad to take that on board. And with that, Tyler, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so thanks again, Jerry. Again, great presentation, great content. And again, thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you for your time and your commitment to improving yourselves and your organization. So with that, hope everyone stays safe, and we'll see you for next month's presentation.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.